In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Daily Memphian Tigers Podcast with myself, Greg Gaston. It has been a tough week for everybody, and last night it was certainly a tough night for the Memphis Tigers. We are here to talk strictly about Tigers basketball. I'll be joined in just a moment by Tim Buckley, the Daily Memphian deputy sports editor and senior writer, and Parth Upadhyaya, the Tigers basketball beat writer for the Daily Memphian. A quick note and then a recap. We are doing this via Zoom because of the weather conditions, so it may sound a little bit different than usual. Just making sure you understand that. Hopefully, we'll be back to normal sooner than later. But as far as a recap is concerned, normally we would do this podcast on Tuesday, maybe even Wednesday. It is obviously Friday as we are taping this podcast. So last Sunday, the Tigers in Wichita, where Parth was there, and watched that team put together an amazing second half, scoring 63 points, winning 112-86. On Monday, they moved up to number 10 in the Associated Press college basketball poll. Javon Quinterly was named the American Conference Player of the Week. Everything seemed to be honky-dory. And then last night, blowing a 20-point lead at home in the second half to South Florida, 74-73. Certainly a loss that can be, in the long run, a bit devastating. We will discuss that with the panel here in just a moment. And then Penny Hardaway after the game with some very, very interesting comments. We will go over that. We'll also give you the latest as far as the Jordan Brown situation, if there is a situation that's concerned with Parth. But first of all, gentlemen, welcome. I hope you guys are warm and safe.
I'm warm. I can confirm that.
Not so sure about safe, huh? It's a doozy out there driving. Parth, how about you?
Yeah, thankfully warm. As we talked about before the pod got started, water pressure is non-existent here in downtown Memphis. So I have not showered today, which is, I know, very gross. Now there's a boil water advisory, I believe, for all of Memphis, all of Shelby County, I think. So
that's right.
Gonna be boiling some water after this podcast is over.
Well, hang in there. We're all in separate rooms, separate houses, apartments doing this podcast. So it is kind of strange, especially with what we've done since the return of the Tigers podcast. It has been a lot of fun being in there with you guys and discussing things. Now, like I said, hopefully sooner than later, we'll all be back together with our producer, Natalie, and just have a good old time. But right now, not good. And I'm not just talking about the weather and the conditions here in Memphis. I want to jump right into last night. Obviously, it was a nice performance against Wichita State, and that second half was great. Parth, you were there in Wichita, but
actually, it was not
hard.
There. Greg, sorry to interrupt you. I was under the weather, had an ear infection and upper respiratory infection, and was sidelined here.
Oh wow!
So yeah, I was watching it from television. Unfortunately,
I didn't know that. I thought you were actually in Wichita. All right, so I stand corrected. Last night, were you there last night?
I was there last night, man. Last night was something. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I bring that up because obviously, if you were fine, you were going to be there as the beat writer. But as far as fans are concerned, a lot of the fans were not there because the university, right, announcing earlier via social media earlier in the day yesterday to stay at home. If you don't have to go, you can. It's still your prerogative. But if you don't have to go, don't. And a lot of folks ended up not going. As they picked safety over who knows what could have happened. And then there was the national criticism because people didn't understand that was the case with the Memphis fan base. They were wondering, how does a 10th ranked team not fill the place up? Well, that's the reason. For anybody from out of town that listens to this podcast, the fans were told not to come to the arena. But with that said, a 20-point lead ends up being a loss to a average South Florida team that played well. Let's give them credit. How did this happen, Parth?
A lot of ways, but first of all, was there really criticism on social media over the crowd? I saw
Absolutely.
Something after I left the game. Yeah, I saw Greg, I think it was your son who tweeted out something that went kind of viral over here, on Memphis Tigers Twitter, saying that there were people kind of talking down on the crowd at FedEx Forum. I thought the broadcast had mentioned, that there was ice and snow and kind of winter weather there.
Well, they mentioned it a couple times, Parth, but everybody doesn't hear every second of a broadcast, and some people jump to conclusions. I can tell you firsthand that I had people who are in the national sports media who texted me, and I had to explain to them. So yes, it was out there. I'm not saying there was this huge narrative with millions of fans, but there were people wondering about the fans and why there was a lack of fans. But
and then there was one bingo brain who, even after he got told the situation, who apparently is a UConn fan, who made the point that, we come to all our snow games, who obviously has no clue the difference between living in Connecticut and living in Memphis, Tennessee.
Oh my God. That's funny.
That's the first time I've heard bingo brain. I've never heard bingo brain. So
what does that mean?
I can understand. That is just ridiculous. That's ridiculous. Okay, no, but I want to get your thoughts and then Tim's thoughts right away, and then we'll dissect it. How did this happen, Parth?
Yeah, I think as we've seen time and time again, they got complacent. They jumped out to that 20-point lead in the first half. It got dwindled down to 15, I believe, at halftime. They pushed it back out to 20. And I think with about 17 or 18 minutes to go, they thought that South Florida would just roll over. And, obviously that didn't happen. And I think when it gets to that point, whether it's really good, as we saw last night when they're up 20, or whether it's really bad, in times of crisis, in times of adversity, instead of coming together, they think, okay, we're up 20. Now it's my time to shine. And they kind of go to that ISO ball mentality. They say, okay, we don't have to pass the ball anymore. I can get mine, And that's how they think individually. And same thing when it's bad, we've seen it before, when they're in holes, when they're playing just not good basketball against mediocre opponents, guys take it upon themselves to think that they can play hero ball and dig them out of those deficits. So I think either way, either extreme, it's been bad. Obviously, Wichita State, one of the few times I think that second half we saw them play collective basketball. They had 25 assists in that game and kind of were popping the ball over the place, and 19 threes, right? Everybody's happy when you hit 19 threes. But I think, it starts there, just kind of going away. And Penny said this after the game, going away from the game plan, going away from playing as one unit. They shot 15 3-pointers in the second half. Versus I think 10 or 11 in the first. Mm-hmm. Doesn't sound like a big difference there, but just in totality, they had less shot attempts, in the second half. And I think a part of that also is just the lack of pressuring USF, not forcing them into turnovers anymore, and kind of not keeping their foot on the gas. I think that's where it starts. Just kind of complacency to sum it all up.
Tim, is it as simple as just selfishness from the players?
Well, I think that's certainly a factor. I think they fell asleep in the second half even more than I did, because they thought they had it easy going. And by the way, I did just before the podcast make an espresso, so I don't fall asleep during the podcast like the Tigers did in the second half. And also because of the water boil advisory, I figured if I'm going to boil the water, I may as well make something out of it. So
right, makes sense.
Absolutely. Look, they thought they had it in the bag, and they just went into cruise control. That was part of it. I think they have issues trying to figure out how to break a zone. I mean, I think there was some good coaching on the other end that helped South Florida. I think that played certainly a factor as well. And then there was these, chemistry issues, which I'm sure we'll get into, that Penny Hardaway raised as well. And then there was the whole, Malcolm Dandridge presence issue late in the game, and it was
or lack thereof,
exactly, which is what I'm getting at, and just kind of a confluence of all of that. But I think one of the biggest problems for this team is that they play so nonchalant for way more minutes than most teams in the country do, it feels like.
Yeah, before we dive into the whole chemistry issues, is it going to be a lingering problem? The comments that Penny made, which were eye-popping, as far as the X's and O's from this game, Parth, I thought you made a great point a moment ago. We didn't see any pressure from Memphis. They didn't try to speed up this team. They didn't try to turn them over. They were complacent. And then once again, giving up the offensive rebounds, the second chance opportunities reared its ugly head. We saw players standing around waiting for a rebound, and then we saw South Florida diving on the floor and getting the rebounds. And that's certainly concerning.
No, for sure. And I asked Penny about that post game, just I guess the lack of pressure, the change in defensive scheme, however you want to phrase that. And he admitted, he said that, once they were up, 20 with 17:44, 18 minutes to go, whatever it was, he felt that, that level of pressure, that intensity was not sustainable. And it's not, for 40 minutes, we all know that it's not. So he kind of took his foot off the gas as well in terms of, the type of defensive intensity they were running with there. And, once that happened, South Florida, as we saw, hit, I think 4 or 5 threes in the first 8 minutes. And all of a sudden it's a, 7.8 point game, and it's anybody's ball game. And at that point, but I think even from there, right, like just because you're not pressuring a team, just because you're not getting out in transition as they did in the first half, doesn't mean that you should be that kind of lost, when a team's playing a zone. I think South Florida played a 1-3-1 zone. Just the complete inability to score in the half court is baffling for a team that has so many gifted scorers, so many, shooters, right? Like, people say that this Tigers team can't shoot, and collectively they have not shown the ability to consistently shoot. But, Jaquan Walton was a 40+% three-point shooter last season. David Jones was not a great three-point shooter, but has been, throughout this season. He's close to 40%. Javon Quinterly can shoot threes. So they've got the personnel, right? They've got the talent. I think it's the strategy or the lack of an effective offense against the zone defense that is the problem, more so than the personnel.
And Tim, let's fast forward to the final moments of that game. The defensive lapses that we saw, but especially on that final play, on that inbounds play, wasn't the final play, but the play that gave South Florida eventually the lead. Pryor, wide open. He was dominating that game, ends up with 21 and 10. How they miscommunicated that. He goes to the hole, gets fouled by Tomlin. Tomlin actually saved a dunk there, and then he went to the free throw line, makes one. I need to comment on that. And then the whole controversy on whether or not Penny called the timeout, which wasn't granted. Quinterly hoists one, gets a pretty good shot off. It doesn't go in. And that's pretty that's a pretty different outcome for what we're used to seeing with Quinterly. But this one was contested and they lose the game. But what do you think about that whole final sequence?
Yeah, the defensive stuff, it came back to bite him. It's been an issue for him, the rotation issues defensively for a while. And, it got away from him with how Tomlin handled it. You're not going to put it on one person, though. That wasn't obviously the only reason they lost the game, but again, a contributing factor. The timeout, whether he's trying to call it or not, off of TV, I don't know. I have no idea whether he really was or not. It would have made sense to, especially after he saw the pickle that Quinterly was in, because the pass to him off the inbounds was contested. And, even though he got off a decent shot, it seemed like he had an option to throw it down deep inside and enough time to do it. Maybe the pass being contested, caused him to think that he didn't have time to do that. I don't know, but it was a bungled mess. We talked about it eventually was going to come back to bite him, and then this one it did, and now it's just how do you handle it going forward?
Yeah, look, nobody is saying that if he was granted the timeout, if he called it. And I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. He said he did it 4 times, but you got to be pretty demonstrative, right? I mean, you better make sure that official acknowledges, and it's not a full house there, so noise should not have been a factor. But let's assume for a second that he did. He wasn't granted it. Okay, that's one thing. But this has been brought up to me as well. Think about this. You have Pryor at the free throw line. He makes the first. Now, he doesn't miss the second one on purpose, which maybe he should have in hindsight. He misses, though. The rebound is made. I'm thinking if that goes in, now it's a 2-point game, obviously, but now Penny calls the timeout there. Before the inbounds, they get it at half court. Now they got a chance to either tie it or to win it with a 3. And so people were wondering, well, wasn't that discussed in the previous timeout? That was the timeout coming out of the when Pryor got fouled. So wouldn't you have already discussed that with the players that, listen, if he makes the second one, here's what we'll do. We'll call a timeout. If he misses, we'll call a timeout. So why wasn't that relayed to the players? or did Penny at the last second decide he wanted to call a timeout? Parth, you got any thoughts on that?
No, I mean, it definitely should have been discussed, like possible scenarios, right? Like you just said, if Kayshawn Pryor misses the second one, then we're going to do this. If he makes it, we'll do this, whatever it may be. And a play should have already been drawn up at that point for a last second shot. Obviously, it was not, because Penny said he tried to call timeout. And if you go back and look at the video, he is motioning for a timeout 4 times, looking at the referee, very expressive. But, Greg, you're right. Like, there was, I think, 1,200, 1,500 people in that arena in FedEx Forum. It was quite enough for me, from my media seat, to hear, what Penny was saying all game to his players. So there's no reason why he, shouldn't have been able to get the referee's attention or whatever it was. But man, forget the last play, to have that botched defensive execution on the inbounds, where Kayshawn Pryor, the guy who's torched you all night, the guy who's had a double-double to that point, just left wide open. I think Tomlin switched on the guy, who I forget, I think it was the guard who cut to the corner, right? Tomlin switched, and whoever was supposed to switch the other end didn't do that. So whether that was
rotation issues.
Exactly. And I think that's what happens, right? When you add it's not on Tomlin entirely. The loss is not on, you can't blame a 20-point meltdown on one player. But when you add a player in December or January, whatever it is, mid-season, who hasn't been here, doesn't know the players, just introduced himself to the guys, a month ago, stuff like that happens. Miscommunications happen. And I think that's why people on Twitter and, people in the media or whatever were saying that Malcolm Dandridge, probably should have been out there. I don't think that happens if somebody who's familiar with what they're trying to do in that situation is out there.
Thanks for the segue. That's where I was going. Thank you, Parth. So, Tim, what about that situation? Malcolm did not play a lot of minutes, so you don't look at it and go, wow, the guy played 28 minutes. He has to be exhausted. He rolled with Tomlin, and as Parth said, Tomlin has not been with the team a long time, although I don't know if it's a problem with knowing all the plays or not at this point. He's been around long enough maybe where he should know those plays. But Penny decided to roll with him. And we'll get to his quote in just a moment, one of his many incredible quotes after the game. But why do you think that was the case?
I mean, I don't know. Look, what Penny did in bringing up the whole chemistry issue in the manner that he did is that now it becomes palace intrigue, and everybody's playing guessing games as to
right.
Who he's referencing and what's really going on, and then part of that makes you wonder, did that have anything to do with Malcolm Dandridge not being out there late, and would that have impacted things or not? We don't know. I mean, it's turned into this now ridiculous game of, and here's another one Parth may or may not get. I'm betting on the under. It's turned into a ridiculous game of Clue.
Clue? What?
Yeah.
Classic board game. I've never played it, I don't think, but I know of Clue.
Oh, yeah. My money's on Colonel Mustard. I thought Colonel Mustard always did it. Statistically.
Colonel Mustard with the lead pipe in the conservatory. It's a given.
Yeah, it almost always happens in the conservatory, too, statistically.
But last night it happened.
Pom shows it usually happens in the conservatory.
but last night it happened on the hardwood.
Right.
So here's the quote, one of the quotes. With all the inner things happening on the team, okay, there's so much going on that you can't play certain groups together. And now you got to go with a group out there that may not be as cohesive, and you have a miscommunication problem. So he's going with a lineup that he says may not be the best lineup, maybe not the most cohesive lineup, a lineup that could cause communication problems with them playing with each other, because there's some groups that can't play together. As you said, Tim, it's a guessing game now. So Parth, what is your guess as to what that all means?
It's tough. Like Tim said, I hate to, speculate, right? Like on stuff that we don't know concretely about, but these chemistry issues aren't something that's kind of brand new. I saw people were surprised, Tiger fans were surprised to see it, where is this coming from and how is this happening? But if you read between the lines, it dates back to the VCU game where they had to eke one out in Richmond. Just talking to Javon Quinterly, JQ and Caleb Mills after that, they had said, we got to get on the same page. Guys have got to stop looking for their own shots and trying to, pad their own stats, so to speak. We've got to come together as a unit. But, Greg, to kind of answer your question as to, what that could be, the easy thing to look at is Malcolm played 8 minutes in the second half. And I'm not saying it's on Malcolm. I'm not saying Malcolm has a problem with somebody else, but that's strange, right? A guy who's averaged north of 20 minutes the past few games, has played excellent basketball, the best basketball of his career, has been your best rim protector, aside, along with Nick Jourdain, just not playing right down the stretch in crucial moments of the game. It's weird. And I think, I don't know whether that's something with, Malcolm Anderson and Naquan Tomlin, because those guys didn't play together on the same court for much of the second half, if not at all through the second half. But I just thought that that in particular was weird, Malcolm not playing.
And it sounds like, Tim, it could be multiple things, as Parth alluded to, because that's kind of the vibe today on sports talk radio, that it's maybe a thing with Dandridge and now that Tomlin's in the mix. But when you're talking about stuffing stats, like you said, Parth, from the VCU game, Malco's not a stat stuffer. That doesn't equate to Malco. So is there another issue with whoever? I'm not going to sit here and speculate names, but I mean, I wonder who it is, because when you look at this team, David Jones is the option, the first option, and Quinterly is the second option.
Yep.
I don't know where those other issues can be, but when it comes to stuffing stats, that doesn't seem to be Malco.
No, and I didn't mean to kind of pair those two together. I'm just saying overall chemistry, locker room problems are not something that's happened, this week or yesterday or whatever it may be. This is something that's been kind of brewing behind the scenes for at least 5 weeks, to my knowledge, from, what the guys have said openly and from, kind of murmurs that I've heard from people I've spoken to. But last night it didn't seem to be that, right? It didn't seem to be a situation where, this player's getting 14 shots and this player's getting 8 and the guy that's getting 8 is not happy. It seemed to be more of,
right,
like Payne said, guys literally not being able to play at the same time, that's some high school stuff, man. That's like AAU ball. This is high level basketball. This is, Division I high major basketball. It's just baffling as to how that can supersede winning, right? Like how that can come, before trying to win a basketball game in that kind of situation. But, if we're speculating, which obviously is not wise to do, but, if we're sitting here looking at the box score and looking at who played when, the thing that obviously jumps out is the fact that Naquan Tomlin and Malcolm Dandridge did not play. I don't think, if I had to go, I got to go back and look, but I don't think at all at the same time in the second half.
Tim?
All right, well, let's look at Professor Plum. Professor Plum is a high scorer who, when he doesn't get the ball, doesn't get back and play defense. You tell me who that fits.
I know who Professor Plum is, but I don't want to say it. I think.
Well, we've said it before.
You got to know who he's talking about.
David Jones, a lot of times, the whole Quinterly Jones relationship is interesting. Quinterly's body language gives away a lot, because when it's frustrated, when he gets frustrated, we know he gets frustrated. And the tell on David Jones when he gets frustrated is when he doesn't get the ball, and he doesn't always get back and play the stellar defense that he's clearly capable of playing. And Penny made references to not getting back and playing D. So, but without Penny coming out and say it, you're forced into this, ridiculous guessing game.
I have to agree. that that's where you were going with Professor Plum. I'll give you a play that kind of sums up the game last night, and hopefully you guys know which play I'm talking about. There was a loose ball, and David Jones was within shouting distance of just grabbing the ball or diving on the ball. But he deferred to Tomlin, who was being guarded by Pryor. And Tomlin was trying to get to it, but Pryor dove to the ground and he got the ball first. So David Jones ended up standing there, either allowing Tomlin to do the dirty work, not wanting to do it himself, or just thinking Tomlin would get it and not reacting to it. That was one play. I don't want to put all the blame on David Jones, but I do see those things where on defense, he doesn't play as hard as he does when he's on offense.
Yeah.
Parth?
Yeah, no, I agree. it's tough, and I know numbers aren't everything, but when you look at the kind of the stat sheet or look at the season stats, I think David Jones still leads the team in steals, right? Like, so it's tough to say he doesn't always play defense. It's tough to say he's not. Tim obviously said he is.
Well, that's a gamble, right? These steals are gambling. You're just gambling, and sometimes you win, right?
His whole game is gambling, right? Like his whole game is trying to, on offense, trying to take guys, 1-on-3, and on defense, jumping passing lanes and trying to hope for the best. But, he's so athletic and gifted, it works out oftentimes. But yeah, you're right. And I think, Tim has a point as well, going back to Penny's comments that, when guys aren't getting the ball, we've seen this throughout the season where it seems like they're taking turns rather than kind of, playing that cohesive together style of basketball. It's like, okay, now it's David Jones's turn. Okay, now you've got 4 minutes of Quinterly trying to get buckets. Now you've got Jaquan Walton, and it just kind of goes in circles, so to speak. And when it's somebody's turn and when it's not the other guys' turn, those other guys aren't playing stellar defense. And I think we all see that, whether it's David Jones or Javon Quinterly or whoever.
There's another. Go ahead, Tim.
If I could interject, though, Greg.
Yes.
It's going to sound a little ridiculous, but for the most part, these are all great offensive players because they're great offensive players. But a whole lot of them just try to do way too much. And it's like there's other great offensive players around you, and they just seem to forget about that all too often. And then I think that's what, leads to some of the bickering and whatnot. There's no reason to be dribbling through 4 different guys or to, have to make some of the moves they make when there's guys that are like totally wide open, and you can almost see them like looking at each other like, dude, why are you doing that?
Exactly. You're right on, Tim. There's no question about it. And Parth had talked about the assists from the Wichita State game earlier, and we did not see that last night. What they ended up with 8 last
25 to 8? Is that what it ended up?
They had 25, I believe, season high against Wichita State, and they had 8 total last night. And only 3 in the second half, 3 assists in the second half.
And how many turnovers? 13?
I got to go back and look. I can look at it now.
Okay, but I think it was something like that. So 13, your assist to turnover ratio is horrible. And Penny says we need 20 assists every single game. All right, let me bring up another Penny quote. Everybody's just so talkative. When the game is going good, there's talking. When the game is going bad, there's talking. And then the negativity of the talk starts to weigh on the team. We're in the huddles, and instead of talking about the other team, we're trying to square things up between our own guys. Says it's become too much. So there's squabbling going on between guys. This is what I'm picturing from that comment. There's squabbling going on during timeouts. They're not talking about what play to run. They're not talking about South Florida's doing this. They're squabbling about you're taking too many shots. You're not passing it to me because I'm not open. Doesn't Penny, who's not a real demonstrative guy during games, and he's admitted to that, more so in practices, but he's not this real loud, he's not Dan Hurley, for goodness sakes. Does he need to be more demonstrative, Tim?
Oh, absolutely. I think he does. It's not his nature, it's not his style. He's referenced, I do it in practice, and that's why I don't do it in games. But, maybe it's time to start doing it in games because you can't let Miss Scarlett run her mouth all the time.
Parth?
Who's Miss Scarlett?
Another Clue character.
The greatest game in American board game history.
I don't think I've ever played it. I know it's a classic, though. I know what Clue is, and I've seen it. Don't think I've ever played it myself. But, Greg, to answer your question, absolutely, I think. He kind of just, I don't want to say he's laid back, right? Because he does, as Tim said, Penny has said to us that he rips into guys in practice. And, to quote Penny, he does his dirty work in practice and doesn't want to do it, I guess, in game settings. But, maybe at some point you gotta rip into guys in games, and you gotta say, hey, I'm the head coach, and, ultimately what he says has to go versus kind of letting guys run the show at times is what it seems like.
And that approach seems fine a lot of the time, especially when you have a team as experienced as they do, but also when you have a team that, is as unaccustomed to playing together as this one is. You do have to inject that voice at times. And look, when you're coasting and it's obvious you're going to be fine, fine, go with the approach you usually do. But when you're watching a 20-point lead rapidly dwindle and it's obvious that you're headed toward trouble, that's, when it's time to switch up approaches and just, get control of things.
When we started this podcast, I think I remember me asking Parth, who's going to be the leader on this team? And I thought it was important to have a leader. And if you look, you think, well, Quinterly's got to be the leader. But I wonder if he is, Parth. And I wonder if it's accepted that there is a guy, because if you have that one guy out there, and normally it's the point guard, it's the conductor out there that they listen to, then you don't have to have the coach interjecting. I wonder if that's an issue.
No, and I think, I don't know, I guess different coaches have different styles. You mentioned Dan Hurley being one of those guys who is very expressive, but I think even with the lead guard out there, you want to have some kind of, right? Like you want to have some kind of authoritative presence on the sideline. And I'm sure Penny is. We maybe just don't see it. We obviously don't see it in games. It seemed like, Javon Quinterly was coming into that role, right? Like, especially in the past 5-6 games, kind of being the extension of the head coach as a point guard is supposed to be on the floor. Not just, with what he does in terms of stats, in terms of assisting and facilitating, but in terms of his voice. You could kind of see his body language improve. You can kind of see him be more vocal in huddles. But, last night we didn't see that, especially when stuff went bad. It seemed like, he wasn't kind of fully engaged, right? If that's fair to say at times.
Yes.
It kind of reverted back to some of the things we saw in Javon Quinterly, before this 4 or 5 game stretch. And then that, to me was concerning as well.
As a coach, like, I wonder if as a coach, you have to designate, like, guys, this is our voice, listen to it.
Yes.
And if that voice is going to be Quinterly, it's going to be Quinterly. David Jones, listen to Quinterly. If it's going to be Quinterly and David Jones, guys, listen to these two guys, but you got to make sure Quinterly and David Jones are on the same page. Or is it going to be Malcolm's your voice? Malcolm is, you can make a case, even though, he had the issues and struggles that he did last season, that Malcolm's been around the longest of all these guys. These are other guys coming into, I'm not saying it's Malcolm's program, but they're coming into Malcolm's town. Do the guys who come from, Big East programs and the Alabamas of the world need to, give a little more respect to the guy who's, been around here forever and is, Memphis is through and through as an Alex Lomax was.
That's interesting. That's an interesting point.
I don't know if that's the case or not. And that's and we're prompted into wondering, by these general comments, it's while you, from a media perspective, while you love hearing the comments because it gives you insight, and I think we've had pretty good insight into issues like this all season. Now you're at the point where without the specifics, it's almost makes you wonder from a non-media perspective if you're better off not having the insight, because it doesn't take the lid off and make you play the guessing games, and then everybody's just kind of wondering who's the guy.
Right. There's going to be a lot of that unless Penny nips it in the bud, and he doesn't have to. And I don't see him, even though some people think that some of the things he said last night was throwing the team under the bus. He wasn't picking specific players and talking about specific players. In fact, let me use two more of these two final quotes from Penny. We just have so many things going on that we're dealing with as we're moving forward. I hope by March it's all gone. And then he said, I don't even know if this is going to be a wake-up call. That's alarming as well, because the first reaction as well, last night's loss will be a wake-up call. They'll be fine. He's saying, I don't even know if this will be a wake-up call. So on the concern meter, where should people be? Where are you, Parth, on the concern meter about this team may hit some more potholes?
On a scale of 1 to 10, probably 6.5, right? Like getting closer to 7. not only was what we saw on the court concerning, the team is up by 20, and we talked about all the stuff that kind of went wrong and the body language change, the selfish play and all that. And, to squander a 20-point lead against a South Florida team that, is average at best, right? Like mediocre, outside the top 100 in every single metric, Ken Pom, the net rankings, Bar Torvik, whatever you want to use, they're outside of the top 100. We know that for fact. To do it at home, no matter what the crowd size is concerning right then and there. But then to hear, like we said, Penny's comments and for him to say that, hey, this might not be the wake up call either. When you've got Tulane in less than 48 hours, a Tulane team that, they've lost to in New Orleans 2 straight times, right?
Right.
That Tulane team is more than capable of getting Memphis again if it plays the same way or even close to the same way it did last night at FedEx Forum. So I think that concern meter is rising, and it's about at 6.57. Like I said, should they take one more loss to a team that's not named Florida Atlantic, I think you're getting closer to the 8 range all of a sudden.
Tim, how do you feel?
Well, like I said earlier, it all depends on how they respond. And if he thinks it's not enough of a wake up call, then yeah, they are headed for trouble. If they come out and they play together like they did against Wichita State at Tulane, then I think you're fine again. But what we haven't, even brought up is the whole issue of Mrs. Peacock. What's going on with Jordan Brown?
That was next on my agenda, my friend.
Exactly.
We're on the
until that is solved, and it's just kind of floating out there. And look, I understand there's all this, student rights, privacy, all this. Whatever. That's a bunch of hooey. I think people hide behind
You're
that.
about to say nonsense. You were about to say nonsense, but you went with hooey.
Thank you. I'm glad you picked up on that. Actually, I was not about to say nonsense. I was about to say something else, and I went with hooey. But whatever it is, does that have an impact on all of this? Was that Penny Hardaway sending a message of, hey, we need to end this Jordan Brown issue now so that guys aren't even talking about it? Does some of the team want him back and some of the team not want him back? And is that causing a locker room rift? I've seen guys come in and, play locker room lawyer and absolutely tear a room apart. Is there a locker room lawyer in there?
Parth,
it's concerning.
Has this thing been squashed? Is it over, or is it still lingering?
I mean, I think from everything we've gathered publicly, right, it is very much not over. I spoke to somebody yesterday before the game, and obviously this is just one person, so, take it with a grain of salt. But this person had told me that majority of the locker room in terms of players were not open to having Jordan Brown back, at least initially, in that first meeting that they had. And the person I spoke to told me that they felt that this would bring the team together in the terms of, it sounds kind of counterproductive almost, but that they finally united, right? They finally realized that, hey, we are one, and this is our culture, this is our family. And they made a decision collectively. But then for Penny to still kind of throw that out there and say, hey, to not squash it, to not say that Jordan Brown is not a part of our program, or to not say that he is part of our program, to kind of leave it kind of mysterious still and say something along the lines of, he's still out right now. Like, what does that mean? Like, first he said he was sick, then he said, he's away, and then he said no comment. Like, what is going on with that? And I think, I don't want to say that was even, in the top 5 of the reasons that last night's debacle happened, but it's yet another distraction that's not basketball related for this team right now.
I was just going to ask you. I was going to say, actually, you don't think that was a reason why they lost that game last night, but I do understand where you're coming from, that it could be part of the whole total equation of why they lost, right, Tim? I mean, if that's on their mind, and who knows, because I don't think anybody's really talked to the players about that situation, but if that's taxing and that's on their mind, that's something that is taken away from their concentration of doing what they're supposed to do. And that's go out there, play well, and win basketball games.
I think that I don't know how old these guys are. What are they, 28, 29 years old? Whatever they are. Well, these 22, 23-year-old guys, look, when it starts, they got blinders on. They're not worrying about all that stuff. I think that's the stuff that's, messing them up when they're in the locker room or when they're arguing with each other in between games, or something comes up at practice or whatever the case may be. I I watched Jordan Brown play in Louisiana. He's a productive, absolutely fantastic player on the Sun Belt level. He obviously struggled here to contribute. Wasn't really filling the role I think they initially anticipated from him. Could he have helped this team if he had been here throughout the season and all of a sudden it started to come together for him in February and March? Absolutely. He's capable of it. If you bring him back now, after all of this, after you apparently had a players meeting and he got rejected once already, and he shows up on Valentine's Day, forget about it. I mean, the ship sinks. I can't see how good comes of that. Now, maybe, and again, not being specific opens the door to people wondering, is the door being kept open for Jordan Brown just in case, there's a Malcolm Dandridge, Nicholas Jourdain, Naquan Tomlin injury? Are you covering all your bases just in case? Are you doing it for basketball reasons? Are you doing it for mental health reasons? Are you doing it for legal reasons? Why are you doing it? Keeping the door open.
Right. That's interesting. All right. As we close out another edition of the Daily Memphian Tigers podcast, Tulane on Sunday, and as you mentioned, Parth, the last two trips down to New Orleans for the Tigers, they have lost games against the Green Wave. I don't think this is as strong a team as the past few years, but it's certainly a capable team. And then a whole week off where hopefully they use that to their advantage to get things right that are wrong. And then they'll play at UAB, which will be no pushover. They dropped to 50 in the net today. We're taping this on Friday. It'll be interesting to see where the bracketologists have them. I think Lenardi still has them 5. Jerry Palm had him 3 going into his latest, which I think will drop today. I think it's a 2-line drop. I think it'll drop him probably to about a 5. So where Lenardi has him, I think is probably where I'd have him right now too, which is fine. But if you start losing a couple of more, as you said, names not Florida Atlantic, it could really take its toll. So what do you expect to see starting Sunday, a quick turnaround after last night's debacle?
I mean, I expect to see some version, maybe not, to this level, because that was an anomaly. I thought the Wichita State game is what I'm referencing offensively, but some version of that cohesiveness, some version of that togetherness. And it's tough to even after what we saw last night and after what Penny said and after, what Naquan Tomlin said or what he didn't say. He spoke for all of a minute and 57 seconds, which is crazy. It's tough to envision the team's going to flip a switch, but they kind of have to, right? Like they can't go to New Orleans and lose that game. That's top of my head. I think that would be a quad 2, quad 3. It just wouldn't be, it wouldn't be a great loss. And it'd be a loss that knocks them out of the AP poll entirely come Monday. And it just, kind of adds more to the bad momentum, if you will. Because, last night, obviously, it is the worst outcome of the season, of course, goes without saying, but it's not one that is an outlier in terms of bad performances. They could have lost against UTSA. They could have lost against Vanderbilt. It almost happened time and time again to these horrible teams. So I think if you go and, lay an egg in New Orleans Sunday, then you're kind of all of a sudden in a dangerous water, so to speak.
Tim, it seems like every team goes through trials and tribulations. You got the final word. Do you believe that they right the ship? It's a quick turnaround for Tulane.
I've seen people lay eggs in New Orleans. That's not a pretty sight. I think Quinterly takes control of this team. I think Quinterly steps up. I think his leadership voice is what seems to be like when he talks after games, his perspective is just terrific. And if that Javon Quinterly can step up, take command of that room and say, this is how it's going to be from now on, I think they'll be fine. If there's forces working against him doing that, and I think he should be the one doing that because he's the point guard, he's one of the oldest. I think he has it inside of him if he brings it out or it's allowed to be brought out, I think they'll be just fine. I think David Jones should have a voice in it all. But I'm just, judging it on what we see in post game. David Jones is a little more easygoing, a little more cut up, a little bit more fun loving kind of guy. I don't know whether or not David Jones is the kind of guy who can step up and say, fellas, this is how it's going to be from now on. I don't know if it would work coming from him. I think it has a better chance of working coming from Quinterly just based on what I hear from him after games. But somebody needs to take control of this team during games if Penny Hardaway is not, but even in between games, even if Penny Hardaway is then.
Hey guys, great stuff. Really appreciate everybody going the extra mile. Parth, safe travels down to New Orleans. Don't eat too many beignets.
I'll try not to.
And Tim, thanks as always. We appreciate it. Also, special shout out to our producer, Natalie Van Gundy, for getting everything together.
Absolutely.
Against some hard times this week, obviously, with the weather. I hear that it could be 60 degrees next Thursday. So fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. Like, I got the golf clubs ready to go, so we'll see what happens. Hopefully next week we're talking about a Tigers dub over Tulane, and it will be more of a rosy picture for everybody. But that'll do it for this week.
Before you finish, though, just so you know, anything that I said in the past, whatever it's been, 45 minutes, don't take it too seriously because I don't have a clue.
What a bad pun, my friend. Hey, folks, be sure to check out our other podcast, the Daily Memphian Food Podcast. That's called Sound Bites. It's hosted by Chris Harrington and Holly Whitfield. The Sidebar with Eric Barnes is about arts, culture, and everything in between. And the Grizzlies Podcast, also hosted by Chris Harrington with Drew Hill. All of our podcasts are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find podcasts. Stay warm. We'll talk to you next time.